Always delighted to update people on this amazing initiative. It's a real privilege to be able to do it. We could go to the next slide. Some of you may know, some of you may have heard me present before, but the story started 7 years ago or 8 years ago when the current pay system was launched. And as a result of that, in 2018, the government committed that the next steps to address the challenges of the pay system would be to move away from the current system and explore another option. So in 2021, the mandate letters of a number of ministers was clear to state that next generation HR and pay, the advancement of the work was a major priority. So those have been the supportive statements of the direction. At the end of the day, a decision will have to be made between continuing on the path we're on or migrating and moving to a more modern system. That decision will be made likely by cabinet. And the job of Next Gen HR and Pay as a team is to focus on the determination of whether or not the alternatives that we bought through an agile procurement are viable for the federal government. Sorry, my hesitation was just someone just sent me a message announcing that our clerk is retiring on June 24th, and it just flashed across my screen. So that kind of distracted me. My apologies. Really, I prefer to be in person. Nothing flashes across your screen. So essentially, our focus in SSC is looking towards the future modernization using a SaaS solution and whether or not that is something that we could consume as a very complex enterprise. PSPC is responsible for stabilizing the pay operations, and the CHRO is counterpart to both organizations in designing for the future, in simplifying for the future, and preparing for transition to new business models. We could go to the next slide, which really lays out the next gen mandate very specifically in its phases. There are 3 phases. We finished phase 1 at the end of March. That was research and experimentation. And that had 4 functions really. But one of them was really testing the proposed solution to see if it was viable. The second phase, which is the recommendation and investment decision, is the phase that we're in. Part of the recommendation process is to finish up what I call the dotting the I's and crossing the T's testing. So things that we discovered during the test phase that ended in March, we are now confirming through a few other test sessions. And basically what we're testing is the viability of this solution, remembering that as an enterprise, we're a very, very complex body that has at least 28,000 pay rules, and some of them are not at all aligned with industry best practices. So bearing that in mind as context, we did take certain principles as guiding principles for the initiative. One is that we would not customize the technology, we would configure it. So we would adapt in order to adopt, not the other way around. Historically, in the Government of Canada, we've been very quick to customize and to make a bespoke solution. That was not one of the principles. The principle is we will not do that. We will not customize. We will configure. The second is that we would look at it enterprise by design. So it wasn't just about the departments that we were piloting with. We were using them as representative for the enterprise. That the system had to be employee centric, that it had to improve the interface for employees. In other words, the people that a pay system and an HR system should serve. And remembering that what we're testing is an integrated HR and pay solution, and that we would use an iterative approach, building on using agile methodology, building on our findings, and constantly iterating to improve and to get more information as we proceeded. So if we go to the next slide, I can explain what SaaS is. So the 3 qualified vendors, the solutions that were qualified during the procurement were Dayforce under Ceridian, Workday, and SuccessFactors under SAP. All 3 software have been tested, but eventually Ceridian, Dayforce, became the software of choice for our testing. The high security organizations are still testing Workday as well for HR, but for pay replacement, we're looking at SaaS solution with Ceridian. A software as a service, for those who don't know, is it's sort of like contracting out your snow clearing. You're not going to need a shovel anymore. You're not going to need a snowblower anymore. You're just going to need a wallet and direction and instructions. So it's a little bit like that. There's a train running through the world paying people. We want to get on that train. We don't want it to be a bespoke solution that just belongs to us, like private railway cars. We want to actually get on the train, and that's what a SaaS solution is. You buy the service. So NextGen is really a unique initiative in the government because normally we buy things and then implement them right away. NextGen has had the privilege of buying it and then testing it against our complexity to figure out the best way for us to implement a non-customized SaaS solution and to align with the best practices of large organizations. There are Ceridian itself, Dayforce, for instance, services already a lot of private and public sector organizations, including the City of New York, the State of California, the owners of Canada's Wonderland, those kinds of things, Seven Flags, Molson Coors, Danone, Accenture, just to name a few that you might recognize. I think also Harley Davidson and a bunch of others. Anyway, the point is that we are joining good company. Large companies. They also do Amazon Canada and others. So the fact is we can see that they have the expertise for delivering this service to a large employer. Now, we are the largest employer in Canada, so we do have, and we're highly unionized. So, and we have a lot of collective agreements. So we have a lot of complexity to deal with. And that's why having the benefit of this test period, NextGen, has really been a privilege to be able to focus our minds on kicking the tires before really starting to drive the car. Could we go to the next slide, please? So this work doesn't get done alone by SSC. SSC is really the host of NextGen, but NextGen is a bit of an anomaly because we are an enterprise organization. And while we are hosted by SSC and while the president of SSC is the single hand to shake for the success of the program, we did not do this alone. First of all, we had thousands of employees participate in our workshops from across the GC, but we also had very specific departments put up their hands to work with us in partnership for the testing and for the pilots. And not all the pilots, as I said, were just with one technology. So we have recently, we worked with Canadian Heritage. We recently finished the work with Canadian Heritage, and essentially they are a good proxy. If you look at the distribution of their collective agreements, their classifications, the kind of work that they have, part-time employees, regional employees, etc. They are a good proxy for many, many other departments across the GC. But we recognize that they were not a good proxy for highly complex collective agreements, the collective agreements that have very distributed allowances and time and scheduling, very complex time and attendance, etc. So DFO, Coast Guard, and CERNAC ISC, so Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada and Indigenous Services Canada, as well as Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Coast Guard, Canadian Coast Guard, volunteered to provide those ultra complex examples of collective agreements for us to test against. And then our partners at SEDQ, which is a regional development agency for Quebec, volunteered to both provide the regional flavor as well as the testing of the official languages, because as you could probably guess, there are certain things that are absolutely essential that we needed to know worked before this could ever be tested for viability on more complex things. The four things that are really what I call showstoppers would have been official languages, security, privacy, and accessibility. So those four things had to meet the legislative requirements and the standards that are set in the legislation before we could even consider it. And so we needed to know that our colleagues who operate primarily in French had the same experience as testers who would be testing the software in English. So I'm happy to say those four things have actually come together very nicely. And so we passed that hurdle of those showstoppers. There are two other partner departments that I really want to call out. One is PSC, the Public Service Commission, because even though we were testing the essential components of the system for HR and pay, they decided to test another feature, which is the recruitment and onboarding capabilities of the technology, to see if their pilot would also show that there was promise in this technology. The Communication Security Establishment also, as a partner, decided that they would test Workday for the HR component, and they would do it on behalf of high security organizations, and they would do it as a live pilot to move directly to that HR modality. And so the information collected by all these organizations and by our testing has all been accumulated in order for us to get a picture of the viability. If we go to the next slide, actually go to slide 7, please. If you look at, so what does this mean for the future of HR? Because you heard me to say we need to adapt to adopt. So we need to take a modern approach, and we need an enterprise approach. So that means that people have to have, in various departments, all the field HR departments need to have a common vision for how the future of HR and pay should look in the government of Canada. And so the vision that was established, and I hope you can read this because I know the writing's very small, but essentially the principles that were agreed to were, and this is led by OCRO, needs to be naturally digital, needs to be perpetually modernized, needs to be connected, one public service, so that when you're an employee, you feel like you're working for the same employer even when you move around, because there's a lot of mobility. We need it to be evidence-based, and we need it to be purposefully people-centric. We really need to focus on the end users. And the end users could be employees who are looking at their own data, or managers who are approving things in the system, or senior executives who are also making decisions around HR, classifications and things in the system. So the users are a variety of different users, and we need to look at it from all of their perspectives. We have to walk a mile in their shoes and really have them with us as we do the testing. So for example, our partner departments were very collaborative, and lots of people stepped up, HR specialists, so subject matter experts, as well as managers, employees, all kinds of different people sitting in different chairs participated in our work. Eventually, this will involve simplifying and standardizing our HR systems across the GC. I know that now different departments have different instances of PeopleSoft, or at least the software formerly known as PeopleSoft, because we've customized it into oblivion. So I'm not sure that it's all it all looks like the original software. But we need to make sure that we start to move towards a more industry best practice kind of HR processes, and that the data that are accumulated in the system are actually governed similarly. Wouldn't it be nice to have a single source of data where when you move departments, no one ever utters the words, well, your file hasn't been transferred, which is why you haven't been paid at the right level for 2 years. Or we know that you've probably shown your educational credentials previously, but just one more time, show it to us again. Or we don't know what your language levels are because we haven't seen evidence of it. Could you show us some evidence, or security, or on and on? Wouldn't it be nice to have a single source of data that follows you from hire to past retire, where every department that you go to would have access to that same thing? And by the way, you would have access to, because you would be able to look to make sure that everything's right. And if your address, for example, is your old address, you would be able to update it in the system because you would have access regardless of where you are. Yes, exactly. I'm totally with you on all those little hearts and smiley faces. I'm a little nervous that some people were laughing because, are you laughing because you think this is total fantasy and that you think I'm dreaming, or were you laughing because you think it's so unlikely? I hope not. Anyway, so the vision is really about these principles and getting everybody on the same page. So what have we learned? Next slide, please. So the good news is we found that most of the HR and pay business requirements for the GC that were tested are met by Ceridian Dayforce. Now, there is no solution in the world that meets everything. Like, I have to tell you that for those of you who know some of the ins and outs of our allowances and stuff, there's no other company in the world that has a 10-day rule for bonuses. Like, for those who don't know what a 10-day rule is, and I may get it wrong because I'm not an expert in this, but the 10-day rule is essentially if you're eligible for a bilingual bonus, we will pay you a fraction of $800 for every day you have worked. But in every month, we will only pay you that month's worth of days if you work more than 10 of them. And then if you did work more than 10 of them, we will go back and pay you retroactively for all those days. So that kind of rule just doesn't exist in the real world. So needless to say, our SaaS partners kind of looked at us like, say, what? You do what? What do you need exactly? So it's not surprising that our current pay system requires so much manual work, because we really do have some things, some rules that are just not digital friendly, really. So, so there is no system that would work for everything, but this system really works for the lion's share of what we need. And for the pieces that it doesn't automatically service, there are a variety of ways in which this could be fixed, not the least of which is that we could clean house and we could actually change some of these things, because they're not written in tablets of stone. They haven't been handed down from the mount. And even though some of them will require negotiation with bargaining agents, I still think that it's feasible to make a lot of those changes. And then in the worst case scenario, for those that we cannot change or that we don't want to change for whatever reason, we can actually work with the company for them to create a like a little off-ramp for that particular thing, digitized by them, for them, with them, modernized by them on a continual basis for our bespoke needs. So that is also an option. We call that cloud extensions. So we have found that this is also a vendor who works well with us. They have invested a lot of time and energy to understand our needs, to understand our complexity. Like I said, some of the things we do are not obvious, like the 10-day rule, but there are other things that aren't obvious. And those are things that we could choose potentially to do differently. So OCRO will be looking at the standardization and simplification of processes and rules to see what the future business model should look like. So what are the conditions of success? That's the next slide. I'm trying to zip through all this so that we really do have time for questions. And I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but I need to situate you. So this is a really important slide because at the end of the day, and everything we do is based on the lessons learned from the implementation of Phoenix, because there were lots of lessons learned documents. So we have kept those front and center. One of the clearest things is there is no point in talking about modernization if we're not prepared to change. If there's no appetite for change and we just want to keep doing the same thing over and over, we're saying there is no different result. Doing the same thing over and over will result in a mess. So we need to change. We need to look at business transformation activities. We cannot be relaxed about this. So that is one of the essential risks that we face. And obviously, we need to be properly funded to do this, which is not easy because it also takes a lot to run the pay system. So, you know, there are decisions that have to be made about funding as well. And we are looking at costing. So what will it take to implement? You can see the 5 things that we have put there as implementation success factors. Obviously, business readiness. Each department needs to be ready and able and willing to adapt their behaviors and their processes to the changes that will be required. We will need to simplify, as I've said, HR policies, processes, collective agreements. Not all of them, not everything, but there are some key ones, you know, between 5 and 10 that are really essential. We do need to agree on one centralized solution. So we can't have people saying, oh yeah, you can have one single source of data, but we're going to need our own data and we're going to replicate it on the side. Like, those days are over. And those days are over anyway in the real world. Like, no one does that. So we have to stop thinking that way, even that we're so special. Frankly, we're not that special. We are a large employer. We do have interesting work arrangements for people in terms of allowances. Like, did you know that that there's an allowance for people who are meat inspectors for CFIA, and they get antimicrobial boots and gloves, and so they should. But that's unusual. So that, for instance, is an allowance that we need to make sure happens. But the way it's paid out and the way it's configured in a system is something we have to talk about. So we have to also not do what we did last time, which is flip one switch on and the other one off. If we do go to a new system, our recommendation will be that it be iterative and that we do it with a transition period where both systems will run in parallel, so that you won't have a moment where you're just holding your breath, hoping the new system's going to work because the old one's gone. I think there is a summary page, but you know what, let's just skip that because it's just a summary. And then let's just go to the last page, which is next steps. So what are we doing next? As I said, we've completed the lion's share of the testing. We're going to finish up some complexity testing because, for example, in our work with ISC, they felt that the testing we had done on complexity was not necessarily profound enough. So we added another layer of testing, which we are doing now on complexity for nurses in the North. They wanted to make sure that we had the time and attendance and the variable allowances properly captured. So we are testing the heck out of that. So we're going to finish all that up. By the end of June, we will have tested that. We will have tested cloud extension. As I mentioned, that's a bespoke solution, which we've asked the vendor to build just to prove to us that they can. We will write our final report, which will be a factual report on our findings to be ready in July. And then in the fall, we will write a recommendation to the government on the viability of the Ceridian Dayforce solution for adoption by the Government of Canada. So that's kind of where we're at. I want to open the floor to questions because I think all the fun is in the conversation. So please feel free. Do people have questions? Do they have thoughts? Any reactions?
Okay.
I see there's some things in the chat. Rick, are you going to let me know what you want me to answer?
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's a lot of questions. So what I will do is I'll just read some out. I think just to keep it streamlined. So one of the first questions is, will it include modules such as learning and performance management, and how will you integrate learning and development into next-gen HR and pay?
Ooh, I love that question. Okay, so think of it this way. When we bought these systems, all of them, we bought 42 capabilities. It's like a 42-room house. So learning and talent management and performance management and recruitment, things that are now in ETMS, PSPM, D2L for Canada School of Public Service, GC Jobs, things that are now in different systems, are modules that are available in this technology suite. Next Gen HR and Pay, as if we were running hurdles, is testing the critical to pay capability of these systems. So Ceridian, we tested the 17 capabilities that are directly feeding it, the ones that are in PeopleSoft, the ones that feed into pay, the consequence for which is pay. Because we felt if it couldn't do that, then we didn't care how good they were on talent management or performance management or other things. But those solutions in the system are definitely available to us, already purchased, part of the license, and we will be able to, if the government decides to transition to a new system, we will be able to turn on those lights in the house as well. So remember, we've tested the viability for HR and pay, which is basically testing the lighting, the heating, the water, accessibility in 17 rooms, and then the other rooms would follow naturally. Now, if, for example, for learning and development, people decided that they wanted to stay with D2L, the software that Canada School of Public Service is promulgating, that's fine. It can interoperate with our system anyway. So we will be able to work out the data transfer, et cetera, into this solution. That's one of the benefits of a SaaS solution, is it interoperates well with it plays nicely with others.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Sounds good. So next one. What is the plan to correct the current issues in Phoenix pay files before transitioning to a new system?
So that's a great question. So the way transitions work, and you've probably seen this in different instances in your life when you've migrated to something new. You don't have to correct everything that ever happened historically. In fact, we've kept the old pay system for old calculations, historical data, because corrections can be made in the new system, even when the information is fed from the old system. So Phoenix doesn't have to have fixed everything for us to launch a new system. You do have to keep Phoenix lit up and working for its historical calculations and historical data mining. But one of the interesting things about this is what we need to actually start on day one is what I call the tombstone data. We need to know what's your name, what's your date of birth, what was your start date, what's your year-to-date pay, what position are you in, what's your classification, where are you in the levels of the ranking of pay in your classification. Basically, the foundational pillar of pay needs to be accurate. So that is what we would need to make sure is accurate for each employee, for all 360,000 employees, before putting each department onto the system. But the rest of the historical stuff can be still corrected in Phoenix and then paid out in a new system, just like we do now with the regional pay system. People are still having their pay corrected from 2016.
Okay. When can departments expect to see the target operating model and business streamlining process documents? Departments will require sufficient time to ensure proper change management and business process changes prior to implementation.
So we are starting to, we've been working on the target operating model, the business development model with OCRO, and we are starting to socialize it narrowly to make sure that we're getting it right and that it resonates. But there will be a lot of consultation on this document led by OCRO. There will be a lot of consultation. So you can expect that is sort of in the next 6 to 8 months, something we're going to be very heavily engaging you on across the enterprise, because it doesn't matter where you would be in the order of onboarding to the system. Readiness and all of that is something that all departments should plan for if the recommendation is positive and if the recommendation were to be accepted. So everybody needs to understand what that future business operating model would look like.
Okay. And here's one, I think it's an important question. The submitter apologizes. They say, "I'm sorry, but what is the difference between this and Phoenix? These things were supposed to have been done with Phoenix." So I think it's a good chance to highlight the true differences here.
Wow. The differences are comparing a horse and buggy to a Ferrari. The differences are the level of automation. The fact that we don't own the system. It is not customized for us. It's a system that is run by people who are expert in HR and pay digital services, and they provide the service to us. It really is the difference between shoveling your own driveway and having you wake up in the morning and the driveway is shoveled. So it's a service. At the service level, it's completely different. It's completely different in the way that it operates, because right now we have satellite HR systems for each department, everybody or each cluster, they're on 8.9, they're on 9.2, they're on a different instance or a different customization of PeopleSoft or MyGCHR. And then that information gets fed in a pipe to the pay system. This is an integrated system so that time and attendance is calculated in real time. Your pay is calculated in real time at all times. So there isn't a kind of, well, we need to stop for the 2-week pay run. It's all constantly being updated. So just the way it's run is completely different. It does the zero to gross and the gross to net calculations in the same system. So if there's a mistake in the zero to gross, it won't go through to the gross to net. So it won't result in a wrong payment. Another difference is that it's a single source of data. So it follows you. Your information is in one place, which makes it much less likely to be subjected to human error or mistakes along the way. The fact that when people move and their files haven't followed, all of their leave becomes like a fiction because you're getting it signed by a manager in hard copy and you're sending it to a different department and you're hoping that somebody puts it in. Hold on one sec. Sorry, everything's ringing. Hold on one sec. Sorry. So at the end of the day, the differences are substantial. It is a much more modern system, and it's a system that really specializes exclusively in HR and pay.
Okay. Thank you, Shireen.
It's also not on-prem, it's in the cloud. Sorry, it's just there's so many things that are different that I have a hard time making sure I list them all.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think it's important to note how different this is. So there's been a few questions about does this mean that Ceridian will be chosen as the next pay system? Are we looking at other vendors? Are departments obligated to take the new system, or can they choose to stay with Phoenix? What about how do separate employers? I assume they mean agencies. Like how do they fit into that? So just a bit of information about that.
So Ceridian has won the contract. So Ceridian is the winner of the contract. If the recommendation is positive that it is viable, the recommendation will be let's go with Ceridian to replace the pay system and the HR systems for all the departments that are on Phoenix currently. So all the people on one pay system and the 33 departments in the core, that 33 clusters, whatever, the 33 HR systems. So all of those departments, and no, they don't get to pick and choose, and no, they don't get to change horses mid-race. That would be the decision. For all others who are not part of the core, there would be some choices to be made, including the fact if they're payable on Phoenix, let's say CRA, for example, they would stay with their current ERP, they would stay with their HR if that's the decision they make. They could migrate to Ceridian. The contract is big enough to do that. But if they don't want to, there's no commitment to do it. So they would feed into the common pay system like they do now into Phoenix.
Okay, thank you. Given the speed of technology's evolution, what's the projected life cycle for the new solution?
Sorry, given the speed of technology.
How quickly technology changes, what's the projected life cycle for this solution?
The contract's for 30 years. Because it's constantly being modernized. The life cycle of it won't become legacy because that's the nature of a SaaS solution. The vendor is responsible for constant modernization, even of the cloud extension. So even of the bespoke elements that you might buy, they need to modernize and they need to keep it up to date with the SaaS solution. So that is a very different. Historically, when we have customized something, we become the owner of it. Like we are responsible for modernizing it, for making it compatible with future technologies, etc. This takes all of that off the table. It's all about us.
Okay, and we have several questions about how were the pay communities and the compensation communities involved in the development of the vision and in the work done so far?
As much and as frequently as we possibly can. We have had, as I said, thousands of people involved in our workshops, in our consultations, in our testing, basically we've been welcoming as many people as shown an interest. We've put out calls, we've done massive amounts of feedback. In fact, when we invited the bargaining agents to the table, we said, please send people to our workshops. And they asked, well, how many people can we each send? And we said, as many as you can find, as many as are interested, because we have done this with the principle of radical transparency. So we are eager, enthusiastic about having people feeding in. Obviously, a lot of the pay experts that work on NextGen on the team itself have come from different departments and from the pay administration branch who have vast experience. We should actually, just for fun, tally up the number of years total that the experience that is even actually embedded in the team, because it's really a mind-boggling number. So yeah, we've tried to open it as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Easy question. Will we be sharing the PowerPoint presentations?
Sure.
Sure. Okay.
Happy to.
Sounds good. Yep, we can send those
Don't
out
want to fill up
after the
people's
meeting.
inboxes for nothing, but if they're interested, sure.
Perfect. So it may have been touched on, but with the software as a service solution, how do we get technical support? Is it through the vendor, or will there still be employees within the government of Canada trained to troubleshoot and provide support?
You have lots of options. You know, with a SaaS solution, we have lots of options. My guess is there will never be a time where a vendor will be able to answer all of the complexity questions that reside in the government of Canada. So the model that we've been looking at would be what I'd call a blended or a hybrid model for service. And, you know, people divide it by tiers, or it doesn't really matter how you talk about the customer service. Whatever model it is, it will have players that are employees who are experienced with our HR rules and modalities, as well as service providers from the vendor. But that decision will be made as part of the implementation. You might have remembered phase 3 was the implementation planning. Those kinds of decisions will all be made then. We have not made, one of the principles that we lived with was do not make any decisions that you do not need to make until you need to make them. And the reason we did that was because we didn't want to tie the hands of future implementers or even the pay administration branch, for example. We wanted to leave those decisions on how this will be administered and who will do what to the people who will be delivering that transition when it happens. So that phase 3 will be the time that we will decide the layers of service. In the business operating model or the target operating model that we're looking at now, we're looking more at like the optionality. What are the things we could do? And there's tons of options for layers of service. But my projection is we will always need some layers that are just ours from our employees who have that experience and that knowledge.
Thank you. How will, or what do we know about how we expect this system to interact with the pension system?
Properly. Is that a good enough answer? No, just kidding.
Oh, sorry.
The pension system has been a very, very important element of all of our research, because transforming the pension system or the digital enterprise of PenFax has been outside of our scope. But working to make sure that all of our pay testing would work for our interfaces with the pension system as it currently exists have been primordial to our research. So that fluid feed of information back and forth to pension from the moment of hire, because honestly, that clock starts ticking from the minute you join, has been essential. So it has been one of the North Stars that we've kept in our sights.
Thank you. Which HR modules are being considered beyond recruitment and onboarding? For example, are learning or performance management included modules? Will it include a reporting module?
So as I said, all of those modules have already been purchased as part of the license. So whether or not the various business owners decide to turn them on will be up to those business owners. But data analytics and reporting, for example, is something that we're testing just to make sure that it meets our needs. And again, OCRO, for example, who's responsible a lot for our data reporting around HR and pay, will decide whether or not it meets all of their needs and whether it's to be used alone or whether you're still going to need a BI tool behind it because you like other services. Those are decisions that get to be made later. We're not shutting any doors.
Okay. For a new system, if it's all one system, what safeguards are there in place for technological issues such as servers crashing, lost data, hackers, things like that?
So all of that has been tested as part of the robustness. It was tested first in the procurement process because the vendors had to go through a tremendous amount of screening for those kinds of things, but we've also tested it in our security testing for redundancy and for, the requirement of having the proper security and data protection, privacy protection, etc. So we've done all that testing.
Okay, and I see a few questions about this one, so maybe we could just touch on that a bit again. People are asking about the responsibility and how it works when people transfer departments in the new system. How easy is it? How difficult is it? Who needs to make the request to transfer an employee? Is it the employee's department or the new department? Just a little bit about that to demonstrate how that could work.
Right. So the foundational principle here is when you have a single source of truth and the data exists in the system for you, changing departments is about however you assign the roles, right? So that's a role assignment question, which is part of the way in which you configure for the enterprise. Those decisions will be made by the pay administrator or HR or the HR or OCRO, for example, HR leads. But the interesting point is that your information will already be in the system. So what you're really then changing is the permissions, as opposed to trying to transfer a file. Like I actually have come to the point where I imagine little people running around the National Capital Region with wheelbarrows full of files being swallowed by sinkholes, because that must be what's happening when they say your file still hasn't been transferred. It must have been just swallowed into the pavement of some street in Ottawa, one of those famous potholes. Because otherwise, I don't get it. I don't get it. I have a director general who's been with us 2 years, still being paid as a director, doesn't have the pay corresponding to the promotion. And when we ask why, it's because the file hasn't been transferred from the original department, even though this person was deployed. So I don't know.
Okay, thank you. So we have questions about, okay, here's a good one. There are other departments who are looking into or implementing software as a service and cloud solutions right now. And how do you foresee these kind of initiatives aligning with NextGen, and how can we work together with them to make sure that everything can integrate in a way that works well?
So that's a great question. Partly that's a question for the CIO branch, and for the OCG, because, people are shifting to new financial systems. So the overall architecture is handled by GCARB. We have mechanisms, governance mechanisms for assuring alignment. The part that NextGen is responsible for is ensuring that the technology we're recommending for HR and pay is compatible and can interoperate with various financial systems, whether it's Workday or S4HANA or whatever, and whether it can interoperate with other systems like CRA's, success factors or S4HANA, SAP modules, all of that. So that is something that we've taken into account, and it won't be difficult. It's just a question of making sure that we have all of the various ways in which we get the machines to talk to each other accounted for in an interoperability matrix.
Okay, this is an interesting question because I think the answer could go a couple different ways probably, but if Ceridian is implemented, and things aren't working like we wanted, what recourse will the government of Canada have?
Recourse in terms of legal recourse, or what would we do to make sure we don't have a meltdown like we had in the last transformation?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I think
so,
what could we do? Can we go back to Phoenix?
Yes. That's why there won't be a moment where we turn one on and turn one off. The Phoenix will be running while we onboard departments or clusters in the new system. And when we do every time, we will be doing testing, live testing before we go live, etc. But Phoenix will still be there, like insurance, running in the background. Excuse me.
I've seen a few questions as well about why is customization, or why is like owning our own software, why is that considered a problem, and why are we going with the software as a service solution?
So owning your own software is a problem for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that we don't have the expertise in-house to stay current with industry best practices in HR and pay solutions. It's like you suddenly have to get an expertise that does not grow naturally and that is very hard to manage internally when these companies invest in just that. So there are many things that if you're not an expert, like for example, I would never replace my own windows in my house. I just wouldn't do it. I don't know how to do it. It's not my expertise. I would hire someone who's an expert in doing that and in doing the insulation properly and everything properly. It's very similar to that. As these complex systems grow, you really want people who are dedicated to keeping it modern. And you also don't want that to be your expense because it's very expensive to maintain and grow digital solutions or to do the manual workarounds when your digital solutions aren't working. So it is much better to have experts handling it for you than trying to become an expert at it yourself. Somebody said, since COVID, everything is digital and more or less seamless. I'm not sure what that means. The pay system is currently very manual, so I'm not sure what that sentence means. I'm not seeing how this is different, except that you lose your people. You won't actually lose your people. I'm not sure which people you're talking about, the next gen people or people in departments. If it's people in departments or people in the pay branch, my expectation is that they actually won't be lost. As I said, we will need people to do work of high value where they will actually develop the expertise in the subject matter of our rules. And so I don't think that that wouldn't be an accurate description of what we're, how we're describing the use of software as a service.
There's a few questions as well about why Ceridian was chosen and what work was done with the Workday solution and how we came to be at this point.
So it was a competitive procurement and 3 companies were qualified, 3 software were qualified, and we worked with SAP, and then that came to an end, and then we then Ceridian took up the torch and we tested Ceridian. It was part of the procurement structure, so they won the contract, and that's how this happened. So like any other procurement, but this procurement was extremely, extremely onerous. It was multiple years. It involved many, many hurdles to actually get here. And so even big companies that do HR and pay, ones that we've worked with before, didn't qualify in the end. So only 3 companies, only 3 software actually met all of our needs to be even qualified to play. So Workday is working with the high security organizations as led by the CSE pilot.
Okay. How will foundational data be confirmed when many employee pay files are in transition between departments that are currently in limbo? So when we switch, how is that foundational data going to be confirmed? And someone else commented that the information is already in the system, Phoenix, and that I'm not sure which department they are, but they said we had asked for permission to help PSPC with transfers and they never allowed it. Tell me, how is this different? So
that's a great question. That will be part of the implementation planning. It's a great question. It's part of the data cleansing question. It's part of the data governance questions that we will have to answer. So we're laying out all of those challenges as part of the recommendation for that phase 3. And in phase 3, we will have to have concrete answers and detailed answers for those kinds of questions.
Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question right now before we wrap it up. But I would like to mention that if there's questions we haven't addressed in this, we will follow up afterwards to make sure we address any outstanding questions. Okay, so one last question.
Do you have time frame for when this could be rolled out? Okay,
Sure,
whoever
we
it
can
is
go with
will
that.
multiply whatever I say by 1.5. That's good. That's probably a good, Marius, that's probably a good practice, and I am not even vaguely offended. It's a little bit like when you hire a contractor to renovate your house, you should double the price and double the time. So yes, if there are a number of time considerations. So first of all, we have to get our recommendation in the fall. After we get the recommendation in, though, a decision is going to have to be made by cabinet. If all goes well, that will be made in a timely way. I don't know what timely means because it could be 2 months, could be 6. I don't know. So there's a time element there. But let's just assume that we make the recommendation and the recommendation is accepted and we're starting your time clock from that moment, whenever that is, like go, the go time. It will take 18 to 20 months to configure for the first wave of departments. So that's our expectation. You're saying multiply that by 1.5, maybe 24 to 30 months. I don't know. I think it could realistically be done, particularly if we take, for instance, the cluster of the MyGCHR departments, because they're already harmonious or they're already coordinated. So a lot of this depends on how we choose to do the implementation. And then once we start that rollout, the rollout could take 2 to 3 years. Like it could take 2 to 3 years to onboard all the departments that are currently in those 33 HR systems and being fed by Phoenix. So that's the more or less time frame that we're looking at right now. Can you hold us to it? We haven't entered that third phase, the actual planning phase. I think that's when we'll get clearer answers where I'm not hedging. I'm telling you that's my best guess right now, given the configuration that we've done for viability. We have not configured yet for the enterprise, but that's my thinking, particularly given Ceridian's expertise in doing this now and their much improved understanding of the way we need things configured. So yeah, that's sort of my best estimate right now. And I'm not offended.
Okay, well, thank you, Shireen, for answering all those questions, and we do have more, but we will follow up after this session to answer the outstanding ones. So with that, the session is coming to a close, but we don't want it to be the end of the conversation. I'd like to invite everyone to complete a quick feedback questionnaire using a link we're going to share in the chat window. It should only take a few minutes of your time. All responses are kept confidential. Yeah, so please take a few minutes to fill out that survey. We'll also send out an email afterwards to all participants in case you've missed it. But other than that, thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed using this virtual meeting space. We hope you got a lot of great information. And again, thank you, Shireen, for answering all those questions. With that said, have a great day, everyone.